What's going on, guys? Sorry for the delay. We're doing today's Grinderslive old school doing it via Hangout. So we do have the nice sound effects. We got all the nice stuff. We got the sad trombone, so I'm pumped to use that later on in the show. But without further ado, I'm joined today by St. Louis Cardinals Justin, the man, the myth, the legend. Had just an insane month of April. I know you started off May pretty well last night too, right? You took first and second in the Gold Glove.
Yeah, that was kind of more of an aberration than anything because I loaded up on Mets last night, so I just happened to have the lucky extra hitters, but it worked out as they were cheap, and I was able to fit some of the Rockies bats in there too. So that was a good night. This week's been a little bit of a drop off. Prior to last night, I hadn't been doing that well, but we're still trending in the right direction. So it's good to be with you on another Friday.
Yeah, man, it's going to be great, and certainly, April was a great month, and hopefully, both of us can keep May going in the right direction. We got a lot of cool stuff going on, especially on DraftKings. There's some Qs tonight. There's the perfect game, which I'm sure you have a lot of entries in. A lot of great stuff. I haven't checked DraftKings in the last little bit, but I assume there might be some overlay lurking. Let's take a look here. At this point, it looks like there's 208 out of 375 in the queue. Perfect game's about half full, a little less, so definitely some opportunity there for some overlay. Also, we have the showcase queues. One of them, I believe there's a $12 have any left. Might not actually.
It did about a half an hour ago, but it was getting pretty close to full.
Yeah, so these showcase queues are definitely filling up. So guys, a lot going on at DraftKings, a lot of stuff to get into. Make sure if you want to play those showcase queues, you get in them early. They are filling rather quickly. So without further ado, since we got started late, we'll start off with some picks here, and we'll start off with pitcher. I'm a big fan of Felix Hernandez and also a huge fan of Steven Strasburg. And before you go into some details, I saw that draft sheet and you were talking a little bit about Strasburg. So one thing I'd like to see, because I respect both of you guys a ton, is potentially you and draft sheet in a high-stakes challenge here down the road. I think that would be really cool. Because you guys certainly had, both of you guys are two of the top players, if not the two top players, and you guys kind of disagreed on Strasburg. So first, I'll let you take the floor and see if you'd like to do the challenge, and then second, talk to me about Felix, Strasburg, and the rest of the pitching options.
Well, I'm probably out of the high-stakes challenge arena, at least for a little bit, since I got whitewashed in the last one that I did. But down the road, certainly wouldn't be opposed to another one of those. But, we're more on the same page with Strasburg than it kind of came across. I had one of my tweets was not worded well at all, which was my own fault. But my question early this morning was, as fantasy players, do we tend to overrate Strasburg based on his hype that he had when he was coming up and all his potential, his huge K rate and everything like that? Do we tend to overrate him, regardless of how good he actually is? Do we tend to overrate him? I tend to think the answer is yes, because I find myself almost always wanting to play him when he pitches. But if you look at his numbers so far this year, not what you would expect from, say, one of the top 5 starters in baseball. Now, granted, a lot of that is, I think he's giving up a 407 batting average on balls in play, and that was another point that I brought up. Yes, that's probably going to normalize over time. 407 batting average on balls in play is extremely high, but it can also be a sign of an underlying issue, as in, is his fastball too straight, or is there something else going on? So the tendency from fantasy players' perspectives is to completely dismiss BABIP, as they call it, as luck-based. I don't think it's entirely that. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. But if you look, and this is what a draft sheet was pointing out, if you look at the rest of his peripherals, his swinging strike percentage, his fielder independent ERA, stats such as that, his numbers are off the charts good. Now, I'm of the opinion that strikeout rate will probably normalize more towards his career rate, which is about 10. Right now, it's 14. So that has made up for some of the batting average on balls in play being so high against him. But, and again, this whole thing, I'll reiterate, I was not making a case against Steven Strasburg. I'm not against him at all. I just think a lot of people tend to overvalue him, say, as the best pitcher in baseball, or maybe one of the top 2 or 3 pitchers in baseball. And I simply can't make a case for him above Felix Hernandez tonight. If there's a multi-pitcher site where I can fit both of them, I'm perfectly fine with fitting both of them. But if I'm on a one-pitcher site or a site where I can't fit both of those pitchers, I am almost always going to take Hernandez tonight with the matchup against Houston, a better matchup than Strasburg has, although maybe not by much. And Strasburg also pitching in an extremely hitter-friendly park tonight in Philadelphia. That was my main point. I do not like Strasburg above Felix Hernandez tonight, but I am not against him. And as a whole, I think gamers tend to overrate Strasburg just because of his name recognition factor.
Sure, and you make a lot of valid points there, and I'm with you 100% pertaining to Felix being above Strasburg today. And I do think in general, and something that you utilized in April, and something that I think is very prevalent and a good strategy in daily fantasy, is just recognizing what names are going to be overvalued. And you see that so much in college football where it's a tremendous advantage. Guys are going to play the names they recognize, not necessarily the best players. In baseball, where there's a lot more value than pretty much any other sport in being contrarian, you get a lot of value in understanding which names are going to draw people to them and which names are going to be a little more, sneaky and contrarian. So I think that in general we all overrate the big stars. I mean, they're stars for a reason; they're good players. But Strasburg certainly falls into that camp. I like him a lot overall. I think he's an amazing play, especially on DraftKings, our sponsor, just because of his K potential. You're probably right; his Ks will normalize a little bit, but I do think he's an elite strikeout pitcher in this league, and he'll be at the top of that list. Certainly right up there with Jose Fernandez, Yu Darvish, maybe even Tanaka. Looks like he's going to be a strikeout machine too. So, in terms of a top 5 pitcher or a top 2 or 3 pitcher, I agree with you as well. I know this is a little bit of a rant about elite pitchers. We're going to see the best pitcher in baseball come back here soon, Clayton Kershaw. And then after that, real quick, I want your opinion. I think the number 2 pitcher in baseball probably still Felix, although it's really close. I'm a really big fan of Jose Fernandez. What would be your list? I know you have Adam Wainwright probably near the top of that list. What would be your top 5 pitchers just in real life for baseball?
Yeah, Wainwright's a guy who he's a name, but he doesn't get the recognition that Strasburg gets a lot of times in fantasy circles because he doesn't strike a lot of guys out. The benefit for him, Wainwright's basically a right-handed version of Cliff Lee in that he doesn't walk anybody, but on days where he doesn't have his stuff, like this afternoon, Wainwright had nothing today, and he got hit around pretty good by the Cubs, who aren't exactly an imposing offense. But coming into today, I mean, he had, I think, close to 30 consecutive scoreless innings. And he's just dominant when he has his command, which he does most of the time. And if he doesn't have his good stuff, he's going to get knocked around. But Wainwright's kind of where I would put. I'd put Strasburg and Wainwright, kind of in that mix as the 4th or 5th best pitcher in baseball, kind of certainly behind Kershaw, behind Felix Hernandez. And in that whole group, you could make a case for a lot of those guys, maybe 3 through 7, guys like Fernandez, Yu Darvish, Strasburg, Wainwright. And it's really hard to distinguish them on a game-to-game basis, which that's the crux of my argument. Almost everyone, if they see those names, let's say all those guys are pitching on the same day against the same opponent. Let's say that was possible. If you put them all pitching on the same day against the same opponent and they're exactly the same price, Fernandez, Strasburg, Wainwright, Darvish, all 4 or 5 of those guys, I guarantee you Strasburg's the highest owned.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, is attributed to the strikeouts, which obviously matter more so on certain sites than other. But the one thing that I agree with you 100% is that he's going to be overpicked relative to his expectation, especially relative to these other guys. And I think that today is a perfect example. Curious to see on FanDuel where Strasburg and Felix are the exact same price. I think Felix is a clear choice, in my opinion, over Strasburg. And it's going to be interesting to see how many people go the direction of Strasburg over Felix.
Yeah,
so.
I think Strasburg's a great GPP play over there. If you want to be different, if you want to fade Hernandez over there because he's going to be the highest owned guy, but in cash games, Hernandez is the one over there that I find myself going with. And again, it's nothing against Strasburg. I have absolutely nothing against picking him or taking him. I was just trying to make a point regarding players and their mindset when it comes to evaluating specific guys.
Okay. One guy I'm going to mention, too, as a sneaky value pitcher today is Danny Salazar. Curious your opinion on him. He's a guy that I like just because of his K potential. His last outing is very, very interesting versus the White Sox. Struck out 10 batters, so you hear that and you're like, wow, it must have been a pretty good outing. Well, no, he only pitched 3 2/3 innings, so he struck out 10 of the 11 batters that he got out. But obviously he got rocked. I think he gave up like 4 or 5 earned runs, and he was out of the game. He's a guy that's kind of not like Strasburg. He has a lot more variance than even Strasburg does, just because he can get rocked. I mean, he's had 2 or 3 outings this year where he's gone 5 innings or less. But he does have that same kind of upside just with the strikeout potential. Maybe not quite as high as Strasburg, but this is a guy that can reach double-digit strikeouts. So I like him going against the White Sox. I think there's risk there. I certainly think he's a GPP play. What are your thoughts on him? And if you didn't go Strasburg or Felix or Cliff Lee or even David Price or Cashner, where would you go for value?
Yeah, Salazar is probably the guy I would look to. Love the price tag. I mean, he was $5,900 on DraftKings the last time he pitched, and obviously destroyed value for that price against the Giants. And now he's $7K, still very affordable, very solid as your number 2 pick. Now the White Sox have generally had his number. That's a concern, but with his ability to rack up strikeouts in a short period of time, I think he's got great upside for that $7K price. I'm sure a lot of people will be asking kind of around the pitchers in the 9 to 10K range. I'm kind of leaning towards Cashner there. I like him when he's pitching at home. The Diamondbacks do have a lot of hitters with some name recognition, but they tend to struggle away from Chase Field. So I'm fine with Cashner tonight. I think that he'll be, say, the best guy in that 9K to 10K range. And I don't mind Peralta either. He's a guy that really impressed me when I saw him pitch against the Cardinals a couple weeks ago. He seems to be throwing with a little bit more velocity this year, and he's got a good sinking action on his fastball. Gets a lot of ground balls for a power pitcher. And the Reds lineup tonight, without Billy Hamilton, without Brandon Phillips, looks pretty watered down. So Peralta's a guy that I'm not minding as like a number 2 starting pitcher on a lot of my teams either.
Okay, yeah, I think that's some great analysis there, and certainly gives you some options at the pitching position. I already articulated basically which direction I'm going. I'm really heavy on paying for pitching tonight, especially with the value bats. And if I'm not going expensive, most likely I'm going to go down to Salazar. I'm not mixing in as many of those 9, 10K guys on DraftKings. Although I do like Cashner a lot, and certainly could see some value in tournaments. I might have some exposure, but in the majority of my lineups, majority of my action, I'm really on the top 2 guys and then Salazar. So let's move to first base, or actually let's start with catcher. I did this yesterday. I wanted to skip catcher too. Catcher's an interesting spot today. I think there's a couple nice options at the top, but in general, I think today it's a really good place to go down. I'm big on Day or Nod for the Mets at Coors Field. I think he's a guy with some talent, and he's supremely underpriced on a lot of sites just because he's a guy who doesn't catch every day, and obviously the Mets have not been hitting. So that's my favorite play overall, just considering value. But why don't you talk through the top options and the rest of your catcher position?
Yeah, he's got a place in my heart too. He won me some cheddar with that 9th inning 2-out meaningless home run last night.
Oh yeah.
The Mets, I mean, they certainly present some value. They're not hitting right now, which you just never know which way to take it in the game in Coors Field. Nicasio was solid last night. De La Rosa, you never know what you're going to get from him. I think you could see a good outing from him. I think you could see the Mets put up some runs. Not really sure how to read that, but with the game being in Coors Field, I'd lean towards the side of the Mets bats. So I like him. There's a couple cheap options. I mean, J-So is catching tonight. He's like 2,700, but I think he's batting 8th. Not as high on him as I am some of the others, but an interesting guy, and I'll circle back to you when I get done with my picks. A guy that I don't hear talked about a lot, but a guy that's been raking so far this year is Yasmil Pinto for the Twins. He's catcher eligible on every site, even though he DHs most of the time. 3,600, a solid price tag on him against another pitcher that you don't know what you're going to get from night to night, and Ubaldo Jimenez. I think he could be a solid play at that price. I mean, obviously Buster Posey is probably the top overall play tonight, going up against a left-hander in Minor who struggled in his rehab start, hasn't pitched in the major leagues for a long time now. in his first start back, you got to think Posey will be able to take advantage of the left-hander. Seems like the Giants have been facing left-handers all week. Feels like I've been saying that a lot. And then, of course, your boy Rosario is back and off the DL and starting again tonight. So at 4,300, I think you could see a nice game from him. Zach Wheeler's a great young pitcher, but he has not yet experienced Coors Field. So that might be a nice awakening for him tonight.
Yeah, I agree with all your analysis, especially on Pinto. With Rosario and Zach Wheeler, it's interesting. I really like Zach Wheeler. And another point, just real quick, is we didn't mention Matt Harvey, who I think is an elite pitcher, and hopefully he gets healthy. Saw someone in the chat mention that. So hope he comes back because he's right up there. Him and Jose Fernandez are probably my two favorite pitchers to watch. And Zach Wheeler is another guy who just has a lot of talent, but it's going to be interesting. We'll see if he can pitch well in Coors Field. That's certainly a big challenge for any pitcher. And this Rockies lineup has as much pop as almost any lineup. So I agree with you on all those catcher picks. I like Rosario a lot. I think Posey, like you said, is the number one option. I believe he has good splits if you're a batter versus pitcher guy versus minor as well. I think he has a home run or something. So certainly all those options are in play, and it really just depends on where you want to go. Value, top end, just depends on what your roster looks like for catcher. So move to first base. I think there's a lot of options at first base. It seems like first base has just recently had a ton of different options. My favorite play by far is Brandon Moss. I'm a big Moss believer, and when I say favorite play, it's my favorite play for value. I think he's in a great spot, and the wind's just blowing out heavy at Fenway. It's warming up a little bit out there, and Buchholz has really had some trouble. The manager's saying that, he's going to be a better pitcher now because we've worked on his, his timing and everything like that. He's going to speed up, and he's going to be in better control just because he has better cadence to himself. In this first inning. So that sounds like a bunch of BS to me. I don't know what's going on with Buchholz. He doesn't look great. I'll wait to see him have a good outing before I stop picking on him, especially in a situation where there's a lot of wind and it's blown out to the right part of the ballpark. So I like Moss. Talk me through him, and then who else you're liking at first base.
Yeah, I think Moss is going to be a popular play again tonight. He seems like he's been a popular play all season. Doesn't seem like his price has caught up to his production so far this year, so perfectly fine with taking him tonight. If you stay on the lower end of the spectrum, I also like Eric Hosmer tonight. I think the Royals' left-handed bats are in a decent spot against Porcello. They've got a decent history against him, Gordon and the like. So I think Hosmer's a decent play.
He's 5 for 14 with 2 homers versus Porcello.
Who was that last one?
Hosmer. He's
got a good history against Porcello, too. All those left-handed bats for the Royals. He's only 3,200 on DraftKings, so I can get aboard his train tonight. Obviously, if you want to spend, I think this will be a night where Miguel Cabrera is a little bit under-owned simply because they're facing James Shields. Don't let that fool you. Miguel Cabrera owns James Shields. It's a fairly large sample size. I don't have the batter versus pitcher up right now.
I actually do. 18 for 43 lifetime, and I have all these BVP stats somehow, and I'm not a BVP guy.
And it's like, what, 9 extra base hits or something like that?
I don't have that exactly in front of me, but I remember his OPS is
like 6 doubles and 3 homers or 7 doubles and 2 homers. Regardless of what it is, Miguel Cabrera does not mind facing James Shields. I think he'll be under-owned tonight because of the matchup, and I think he's a great GPP play tonight. If I was picking a high-dollar hitter, I would actually take Miguel Cabrera over Mike Trout. Cabrera's 300 cheaper on DraftKings. And Trout doesn't have a bad matchup either, but Miguel Cabrera just sees the ball very well against James Shields. So, and I'm kind of a semi-BVP guy, but with that kind of sample size, if it gets up to 40 or 45 at bats, I'll believe in it. So I like Cabrera. I think you could go with Pujols as well against Colby Lewis, but I don't have him on too many of my teams tonight. There's a few guys I like in the mid-range. But the name that I wanted to bring up is spacing on me right now.
Oh, no worries. What do you think about Satan for the Mets? He's super cheap and obviously in a pretty good spot here. Or is it Satine, Satan? I mean, I hear all the grinders. We butcher names all the time, and I certainly just did one there. So
I thought it was Satin, but I could be wrong myself.
Satin sounds better. So let's go with Satin.
Yeah, obviously in play. I mean, against I didn't even know he was still on the roster, to be honest. He started all the time last year against left-handers, and they've been going almost exclusively with Lucas Duda. So good to see him in the lineup tonight, certainly as a value play. I think I like Hosmer a little bit better, but I can get behind that.
Yep. Okay. So I think we're on the same page with first base. Obviously, if you want to spend up, there's a couple of the standard options. You can play Miguel Cabrera, like you mentioned before. He's first base eligible, or you can play him at third on DraftKings. Some other guys at the top. Adrian Gonzalez is hot. I'm not a huge fan. You got Morneau, who I really like. He's just absolutely seeing the ball well. And Coors Field, it rejuvenates a lot of players, and Morneau seems to be in that boat. So obviously, all those guys are in play. I mean, I think some people will be on Goldschmidt. I'd warn against Goldschmidt just because of the park, but there's options. Pujols is another guy who I think is in a good spot. Pretty much options anywhere you want in terms of price at first base, and certainly, you can build the rest of your roster, then kind of go there depending on how much money you have left. So
Edwin Encarnacion was the other guy I was going to mention, and I couldn't find him in the listing because the lineup that I have open right now, he's in it. So he was over on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Not a huge fan of the Blue Jays lineup tonight against Garrett Cole, but Encarnacion is still underpriced.
Yeah.
So I'll have him on a few GPP lineups just because at 3,900, he's got the potential to get you 25 or so fantasy points if he has a good night. So I wouldn't use him for cash games, but I think in GPPs he's got the upside to be worth a look.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about Encarnacion as well is, you basically just hit on it there, but he's a guy who's going to hit over 30 home runs, probably even 35, and you're not going to see guys with that much power under 4K very often. So certainly agree with you. The matchup against Cole, who I actually think is a really good pitcher, is definitely not great, but at that price with his upside, especially per GPP, I think he makes a great play. And all these first basemen are not going to be insanely owned just because there's so many different options. So let's move to second base. Second base is interesting. I think there's a lot of different plays. Curious who your number one option is. Mine is Cano. Cano's going to a much more friendly hitter's park. He's facing Peacock, who's just an absolute terrible pitcher. The guy has extreme fly ball tendencies, and I think all the lefty bats are massively in play for Seattle, which makes me even more confident in Felix Hernandez over Strasburg, because I think he's basically not a surefire thing, but as much of a surefire thing as you'll see for the win in baseball. So I think all these guys are in play on Seattle, and in particular, since we're talking about second base, I think Cano's the number one option. What are your thoughts on him and then the rest of the position?
Yeah, I think Cano is going to easily be the top guy tonight. Really like him, like you mentioned, against Peacock for the Astros. He's starting to hit the ball a lot better. He's got a 9-game hitting streak going right now, so nothing wrong with him tonight. If you've got the funds to spend on him, certainly at a relatively thin position, I think it's something you could definitely do. But for the first time ever, I feel like this needs like a drum roll or music or something.
Oh no! Let me get your. Hold on. All right.
I'm going to recommend a pirate on the air so the Pirates haters cannot say anything tonight. I actually like Neil Walker tonight.
Okay.
I got a lot of grief for not liking him when he was like 5,300 on DraftKings from the Pirates fans because he hit like 6 homers the first couple weeks of the season. He's cooled off since then. His average is down to about 240, but his price is down as well. And Morrow's a guy who cannot find the strike zone right now. Got pulled from his last start when he hadn't even allowed a hit because he had walked 8 batters in 2 2/3 innings. It's a disaster waiting to happen. So Neil Walker is batting second tonight behind Tabata and in front of McCutchen. So I think that's a solid spot for him and very reasonable price now, like 3,800 on DraftKings. Really, he's the low end option that I'm going with if I'm not going with Cano. I don't think there's a ton of guys. I don't really care for Daniel Murphy against a left-hander tonight, only because his price is so high. If I were going Mets bats and only going a couple of them, I'd probably go in a different direction. But I certainly can't fault you for using Murphy if you have a Mets stack or something like that. But really, not a lot to love for me at second base tonight.
What do you think about Rayburn? I've heard everyone talk about him. He has really good splits versus him, super cheap. I've played him already this year versus lefties, and it hasn't worked out as well as I was hoping. He's not doing well this year, but he's batting 5-hole, and he is just so cheap, man.
Yeah, I'm on like 2,200 on FanDuel, I think.
I have him in FanDuel right now, and I just freaking hate it.
He certainly can go there, and he has good numbers against Danks. So
I know. I just feel like I'd I've been here before. I feel like.
Yeah, we all have. I mean, a lot of people are going to be on Rayburn tonight. It's the lefty killer who has not been a lefty killer so far this year. How about this guy? And I wrote him up today. I don't think this is crazy. If you want to take Anthony Rendon against Cliff Lee, Rendon is hitting 565 against left-handed pitching this year. I mean, I know it's only been a month, but 565, that's a killer batting average against left-handed pitching. And we talked about him, Smizzle and I talked about him Wednesday night when he was going up against Oberholzer, and he had 4 hits and a home run.
Oh, so, that won me all the money. That was a great day for me, and for you, for Smizzle, everybody. The Rendon went just absolutely ham.
Yeah, if you did not have him, you pretty much lost because he was very highly owned. I mean, he's going to profile as a very, very good major league hitter against left-handed pitching. Obviously, he's not going to hit 565 all year against lefties. But he's going to be way under-owned tonight because they're facing Cliff Lee, and I think he's a great GPP play because of the way he hits lefties.
Yeah, I'm 100% on the same page. I absolutely love him. I had him, not to toot the horn, but I had him on every single lineup, and I think everyone did. I mean, those splits are just too hard to ignore, and last time the matchup was just so good. Obviously, Cliff Lee's a better pitcher, but like you said, he profiles so good for his left-handed pitching. So hopefully, he has another good day versus lefties. I certainly am going to be plugging him away, and definitely will have a little bit of exposure to him. And the wind is blowing out pretty strongly there too, so that's also a nice benefit there. Let's move to shortstop. I'm keeping the Tulowitzki talk a little low today. I love Tulo as always, but man, it's getting hard to roster this guy. It's getting really hard to roster this guy at his price, especially on a day where there's Strasburg and Felix and all these guys. It's basically impossible to roster him on a cash game lineup if you want to roll out 2 top-end pitchers on a multi-pitcher site, or even if you want to roll out, say, Felix or Strasburg on FanDuel. It gets very, very difficult to get him in play. So curious your thoughts on him. I obviously going to have a lot of exposure to him, but I might not have him on cash games, which just feels so wrong. So talk me into Tulo and talk me into some other people.
The 6,100, that's a pretty steep price to pay. You're getting into pitcher territory at that point. Certainly for GPPs, I'll have exposure to them. Really hard to justify that price tag, though, like you said, for cash games. And there's quite a few guys. I'm going cheap at short tonight. I think that's a decent way to go. And I know I mentioned him a lot, but I really like Everth Cabrera. Bronson Arroyo is basically throwing batting practice fastballs these days. He managed to shut the Phillies down his last outing, but I think he had a 9-something ERA going into that. He doesn't strike anybody out, and I know the game is in Petco. That doesn't affect Everth Cabrera as much, though, because he's not a home run hitter. So super cheap.
Maybe.
Super cheap.
Deals. Sorry, I keep talking over you there. I was curious your opinion. Would you know how good Montero holds people on base?
I don't think great, but no, I don't specifically know.
Could chat, look that up. That'd be great to know because Cabrera.
Bronson Arroyo's pitches are so slow that he could probably beat a second base before the pitch got there. And he's always a threat to steal. I mean, it doesn't unless you've got Yadier. I mean, he's no Yadier Molina or anybody like that behind the plate. So, I think Cabrera is a great option tonight. 3,300 on DraftKings. I actually think the Padres are a very sneaky stack tonight. Nobody will stack them because the game's in Petco, but Bronson Arroyo is just that bad. And they're super cheap. I mean, you can stack Padres on DraftKings and fit Hernandez and Strasburg in there. So I'm doing that on a team or two just in case that Arroyo decides to implode tonight. So I like Everth Cabrera. 3,300 is a great price. I also like Andrelton Simmons. 3,200, right around the same price tag. He's batting up in the order tonight for Atlanta against Tim Lincecum. Solid play there. And if you want to keep right along that range of shortstops, Brad Miller has been moved back up in the Seattle lineup, batting second tonight against Brad Peacock. So there's 3 guys right there, all either 32 or 3,300 on DraftKings, that I think make fine plays. And I'm having a tough time paying almost double that for Tulowitzki, or even 1,500 or 1,600 more for guys like D. Gordon. So I'm on those 3. Also, a little bit of exposure, but not much to Jose Reyes because he's not doing much right now. They scored 7 or 8 runs last night, and he was 0 for 5 again. So he's not hitting very well. But, again, one of those guys that the name recognition pops out to you, and a guy that tends to be highly owned because of it. So I'm on the 3 cheapies today. Cabrera, Simmons, and Miller.
I love Miller, love Cabrera. Cabrera is someone I'm really, really high on, especially with stolen base being worth so much. The Padres stack, I thought I was being sneaky on that, but obviously primetime 420 is a San Diego native as well onto that one, I'm sure. And you just mentioned that you're onto it as well. And now the Grinders community knows, so might not be as sneaky of a stack, but certainly still one that I think has a lot of merit. And Tulo, I love you. I mean, yeah. People are going to say it. I love Tulo. Like, I love him more than anything. My girlfriend and I, we got all this Tulowitzki memorabilia, and I don't even care what the chat says, but it's painful. It pains me today. Like, I've had him in my cash game literally every single day, and fading him at home just feels so wrong. On FanDuel, it's just absolutely ludicrous when you try to fit Felix and Tulo. Just build a lineup where you plug in Felix and Tulowitzki first. You can do it, but man, it's the lineup seemed to look a little bit better with Tulowitzki out. So
a little.
Yeah, it's painful today. It's really painful, but I'll probably still find a way to get him in there. And certainly on tournament.
Cabrera is like 28 or 29 over there, right?
He's 29, so like literally everywhere. All these shortstops I really like, I think are actually in good spots. Are like, essentially half the price of Tulowitzki. So it's hard. It's hard to fit him in, especially with Felix and Strasburg. But I certainly will try to find a way on tournaments. Obviously, I'm going to have exposure to him. There will never be a night where I don't play Tulowitzki just because when he homers, I want some exposure to it. And certainly, I think, like I've talked about before, I think he's probably the second best player in baseball. I really don't think that's too far of a stretch. Do you think that's crazy, Cards?
Are you talking just hitters?
No, yeah, just hitters, and you have to factor in defense. Defense, I think, is critical, and that's why I give him such a bump.
No, I don't think that's crazy. I mean, certainly the stats.
If he stayed healthy, it definitely would be true. The only knock on him is health.
I don't think that's crazy. I mean, the stats are bearing it out.
Okay, all right, we're on the same page. Good enough Tulo talk. I know we probably just hit the over on that, so yeah, and I turned red like someone just said, which is really funny. But yeah, what's really funny too is how much my girlfriend loves Tulowitzki. So there's a lot of love in the Jennings household here. But let's move to we talked about third base a little bit with Miguel Cabrera. Let's move to third base again. Who else are you liking at this position? I think David Wright is the obvious one going up against the lefty in Coors Field.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned with David Wright, to be honest. One home run through the first month. Seems like his power has been sapped a little bit. I certainly would expect him to hit in Coors Field, but he was 50 to 60% owned last night and did nothing. So I love David Wright tonight. I think he's the top guy. But if you want to play the fade in a GPP, I certainly I can see it because there's a ton of third base options tonight. And if you want to get a leg up, if Wright has another 0 for game and you don't have him, and you have a cheaper guy that goes off, you'll be at a huge advantage. So I do like him tonight, but I'm a little concerned about him in the long term with the way he's hitting. And I think there's guys in the, say, 3,500 to 4K range that you can target. Manny Machado is back. He's not available on every site, but he hit 667 during his rehab stint, so clearly he's fine with his timing. And the Orioles face Ricky Nolasco tonight, so I think that their bats could provide some worth for you today. So 3,800 on DraftKings, certainly no problem with rostering Manny Machado if you want to go that route. Let's see, around the 4K, you've got Carlos Santana, a guy who's hitting the ball a lot better now, and let's see, Danks is pitching against the Indians tonight. So at 4K, Santana's a guy I love at third base tonight.
Yeah, I love Santana as well. I think he's a really good player. Although that Indian stack is going to be nice. Danks is a guy that really has a propensity to get blown up, and a lot of lefty mashers.
Yeah, I have a problem not stacking against John Danks. I tend to do it a little too much, basically every time he pitches.
Yeah, no, you got to do it. And it's interesting. Third base, like you said, I think a lot of people be on right. So probably in a GPP, it's a really nice fade overall. Especially like you said, because his power is not what it used to be. Still easy to run into one at Coors Field. One other thing I'll mention, I'm out here in Denver, obviously, and we're going to see a lot of runs this weekend, I think, just because the weather's really turning around. We had a lot of days, even in March and stuff, that are mid-70s, 80 degrees out here, and then it kind of took a cold spell here in April for most of the month. And now it's really starting to warm up. It's in the mid-70s today, and tomorrow it gets into the 80s. And I've talked about it before. I actually think there's value in basically the warmth of the weather, especially when it comes to home runs. So in addition to that, I like that you brought up Machado. He's just a joy to watch. As good a glove as there is out there. Him and Arenado, you can just basically lock in the Gold Glove for those two guys at third base for the next couple of years. So love that he's back.
Beltre, he's another guy I wanted to bring up. Not been hitting since he came back, but he's still cheap everywhere, sort of cheap.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna wait to go back to him until they get back into Arlington. I like him. I mean, obviously an elite hitter, but I would prefer to play him when he's at home versus in the Angel Stadium. Just because
he didn't exactly hit that great at home this week either.
I know he's been bad the whole time. I mean, he's strung together a couple sequences where he got some hits. When he first came back, he had some hits, but the last 3 games, I think 1 hit and 10 at bats. So that's not something that's that inspiring. What are your thoughts on him?
I mean, I'm on him a little bit tonight, but not as much as I have been.
Okay. Let's move to outfield, and then we'll take some questions, maybe do a pick 5. You mentioned that you like Miguel Cabrera over Mike Trout. I certainly see the merit to that, but, man, Mike Trout is locked and loaded, and he's going up against Robbie Ross. So I am a big believer in Mike Trout tonight. I think he's the number 1 option overall.
And then Colby Lewis is pitching tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry, Colby Lewis. I mixed it up. I'm sorry, guys. But either way, he's going up against a Texas pitcher that's not that great, and I really like him.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I mean, I'm just saying if you were having a lineup where maybe you had to pick between the two or something. I mean, I've got some exposure to Trout as well. One of those guys that if he has one of his games where he goes nuts and you don't have any exposure to him, you're way behind the 8 ball. My favorite outfield play tonight from a price per dollar perspective on almost every site is Adam Jones. Nolasco, another nice pitcher to pick on, and Jones hasn't exactly been mashing to start the year, so his price is way down. 3,600 on DraftKings, you really can't beat that, and I think he's 3K on FanDuel, so no problem with rostering Adam Jones tonight. Again, from a price or a production per dollar standpoint, I think he's going to be one of the top guys of the night. When their lineup comes out, you can probably find some value in the San Diego outfield. Maybe don't go nuts, but I wouldn't mind taking one of those guys, maybe a Will Venable, something like that. One of their left-handed hitting outfielders against Arroyo, I think, could make a nice play tonight. There's a lot of sites where Rayburn is outfield eligible, so I think he makes a good value play as well. And Jose Tabata, 2,200 on DraftKings, is leading off for the Pirates tonight against Mike Leake. I think he's your best super cheap guy of the night, like min-salary guy. I mean, you can't beat 2,200 price tag for a leadoff man. So what do you think of some of those value guys? And then I'll let you talk through your top plays outside of Trout.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the value plays. I'm sorry about the Trout thing. I was thinking of Robbie Ross because when the A's went off of him, and I honestly couldn't remember. It was more Trout's one of those guys that is not. I mean, obviously you look for the matchup and whatnot, but Trout's just a guy that I'm always going to bring up just because he's the best player in baseball. But yeah, I agree with you. Tabata's really interesting, batting leadoff. Curious your thoughts on Morrow as a pitcher overall. Kind of a guy that when you watch him pitch sometimes he looks absolutely dominant, and it seems like you'd never want to target hitters against him. But then other times he just gives up a ton of hits and he doesn't look that great. So I've always been kind of interested to hear people's take on him because I think he's one of those guys that you can kind of be fooled by with the eye test. What are your thoughts on him as a pitcher overall? Because I've also heard people talk about him as a pitcher today. So curious your thoughts there.
Oh, wow. I haven't seen anybody on him today. It would concern me with the 8 walks in 2 2/3 innings in his last start. I'm not going anywhere near that now. Whether he's got some mental issues going on or just lacks his command right now, he hasn't really been that good for the better part of a year and a half. He was really good, I think it was 2012, may have been 2011, but he hasn't exactly been great since then. I agree that he's got good stuff at times, and it will show, he'll pass the eye test if he's on a given day. But anybody who can walk 8 in that short a time frame, and he just has so many starts where he's basically done after 5 innings because he throws so many pitches, and he allows so many base runners with the walks that you could get 2 walks and a 3-run homer will do you in. So the Pirates have a reputation as a relatively patient team at the plate. They do strike out a lot. But the fact that they're so patient is kind of part of the reason why I'm on them tonight. And again, nobody's been more vocal against the Pirates this year than me. And I think Neil Walker, guys like Walker, Tabata, McCutchen, Marte's hitting down in the order tonight. all of them aren't afraid to take a walk. Even Pedro Alvarez, who strikes out a ton, also walks a lot. I think that's a nightmare matchup for Morrow. I'm not a big Pirates guy, but I don't think the matchup's right for Morrow today.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't see. I mean, basically, I heard people talking about him as a punt play. Obviously, his price is way down on a lot of sites, and he does have some K potential.
If you're going cheap like that range where he's at on DraftKings, I cannot make an argument for anybody that's that low over Salazar.
Sure, and I agree with that. But like you said, 8 walks. I mean, that's just absolutely brutalizing. I'm looking at his game log. He's always had the control issues, and really, it's the velocity that he had in the past that, and he still has, that made him look like a sexy pitcher, someone who had high potential, that looked like someone you wouldn't necessarily want to target against. But with all those walks, and he's a guy like we've seen before can get blown up. I certainly think there's a lot of merit for a lot of these Pirates guys, and certainly a team that you could stack. Given that he can basically walk a lot of guys, and that can lead to home runs with multiple people on base, etc. So I'm with you on all the guys that you mentioned in the outfield. Other guys I think are interesting. I think all the guys in the Mets-Colorado game certainly have value. Like I said, it's warm. You got 2 teams with the highest team totals of the day. And there's some value there in the outfield. I think Chris Young ended up being a pretty popular pick. He's batting cleanup, but he has some severe platoon splits, much better versus lefties, and I think he's going to do well versus De La Rosa today. So I think we're on the same page overall. We'll get some questions in here. If you have any other topics real quick, I'm happy to dive into them, but I'm going to pull up his pick 5 real quick because I think that's a little bit fun. And guys, feel free to fire in some questions that St. Louis and I can get to for you. Quick here on the pick 5, first option that we have is, it's actually the basketball one, David Wright versus Robinson Cano. I think this is 2 really good picks overall. I like both of them. What are your thoughts there?
I'll take Cano. Again, concerned about David Wright's lack of power this year. I think he'll be the sexy pick in Coors Field, but Cano's swinging the bat really well right now and probably gets the best matchup of the day simply from the opposing pitcher standpoint. So I'll give that the edge over the Coors Field factor and the struggling David Wright. I like them both too, but I'll take Cano.
Perfect. Okay. Let me see here. The next one we have, and I'm with you. I like Cano actually too. I'm really high in Cano overall. Jason Worth versus Jay Bruce.
2 guys we didn't really talk about. Not a big fan of Worth going up against Cliff Lee. If I was taking a righty from the Nats, I'd rather have Rendon. So I'll take Bruce there.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going Bruce as well. At home, just a lot of potential. Here's one you've already answered, and I'm with you. Mike Trout versus Miguel Cabrera. That's an interesting one. I'm going Miguel as well, just with those splits versus Shields, but certainly see the merit for both those guys. Another interesting one here is Joey Votto versus David Ortiz.
I'll take Ortiz. Again, you mentioned the wind blowing out there in Boston, and I'm fairly high on Peralta tonight for Milwaukee, so I think it's a better matchup for Ortiz. At home, but both of them are at home, and the weather gives the wind blowing out there gives a little bit of edge to Big Papi, but even neutral to that, I just like Peralta as a pitcher a little bit better than Straley, so I'll take Ortiz there.
Yeah, I'm with Ortiz 100%. Love watching him at Fenway, and with the wind blowing out, I mean he can really sneak out a home run in a multitude of ways there. So I like Ortiz. Next one is Pence versus Gordon. I assume you're on Gordon, given how bullish you are on the Royals' left-handed bats. I think.
Yeah, I like Gordon simply because of that. I don't mind Pence though. I think the Giants' righties are in a good spot too against Mike Minor, but I'll take Gordon. I think he's going to have a breakout game sooner or later. He's been driving in some runs of late. Still hasn't had the homers come his way, but I'm a fan of his game, and tonight I think the matchup sets up well for him.
Okay, I'm with you, and I'm definitely on Gordon as well. Although it's interesting, I think the Giants make a really good GPP play. Like you mentioned, Minor's been struggling a little bit, and a lot of righty bats that hit lefties well in that Giants lineup. So definitely see some merit for them, especially in a tournament. But one-on-one, I'll go with Gordon, and I really do like the Royals' left-handed bats today. I've got some questions here. Salazar or Beckett? I'm going Salazar for sure. I haven't even considered Beckett at all today.
I don't like Josh Beckett. I think he's the next guy along the lines of Harang and Burley to kind of see his stats normalize a little bit. It's not like he's 95 or throwing 95 miles an hour anymore or overpowering people, and he's not getting any younger. So I'm not a fan of Beckett. He's probably my number 1 stay-away pitcher for the day of any of the mid to high-end guys.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And he's just not the same pitcher he used to be. And a lot of people coming in might, be longtime baseball fans, think Josh Beckett, think back to the days where he was absolutely dominant with Boston. He's just not even close to the same pitcher anymore. So certainly expect his stats to normalize, given that his stuff just isn't what it used to be. Got some other questions here. Basically, people asking about Upton and Ortiz. I go Ortiz over Upton. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do the same. Speaking of, since we talked about the Dodgers, I do kind of like the Dodgers outfield bats tonight. I was kind of waiting to see who would be in or out. I like Puig batting second. I was kind of surprised he was playing after playing both sides of that doubleheader yesterday. And Ethier's batting fifth, and he's only 2,800 on DraftKings, so I think he'll be one of your popular value picks over there.
Okay. Longoria and Tabata or Santana and Jones? Assume that's Adam Jones, and I would definitely go in Santana, Adam Jones.
Yeah, that's Adam Jones, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think Adam Jones, like you mentioned, is a great pick. Got a guy asking about NBA real quick. Just the thing that I think you have to pay attention to most today is just making sure you get everyone from the Portland and the Houston game in. Wesley Matthews is someone I've played every single day so far in the fantasy.
Smart move. He's too cheap.
He's been too cheap. He's been pretty bad to start the series, but he's really come on strong the last two games. He's had good splits versus them all year. And the one thing I thought they were going to do a lot with him, and part of the game plan, was to basically go to Matthews down in the post and ISO him against Harden, who is one of the worst defenders in the NBA, right up there with Damian Lillard and some of these other guys. So I think Wesley Matthews makes a tremendous play overall, and certainly someone that you can kind of start your roster with, because I think he should excel versus James Harden. Rendon or David Wright? That's a very, very interesting question. I love Rendon. I'd plug him in at second base if I were to play him. But if you wanted to play Cano and someone like this, certainly think that you can go Rendon. I think David Wright's a better cash game play, but certainly in GPP would go Rendon. Curious your opinion on that, because you seem very bullish on Rendon and not so high on David Wright.
Yeah, that's just kind of on a comparison level with their, just depending on the positions they play. If that's a GPP, I have no problem with taking Anthony Rendon there, and that's really the only type of team I'm taking Rendon on tonight. So just if that's a cash game, I think you got to play it safe and go with David Wright.
Yeah, I think at cash game, there's no point in trying to get tricky or anything like that. I think you just plug in David Wright. Go with the park factor, go with him versus lefty. I mean, I think that's important. So I like Rendon a lot. Or Rendon, as Fizzle is saying in the chat. He has a special place in my heart. He absolutely crushes lefties, but Cliff Lee is one of those elite lefties. So now we're getting multiple pronunciations here in the chat. I don't know. Do you know if it's Rendon or Rendon?
I think it's Rendon.
Okay, Rendon. That's how Jay do. So I'm butchering the pronunciation. My bad, guys. Certainly feel free to correct me on that at any time. I watch significantly more basketball than I do baseball. And wanted to show with that, how important do you think it is? I do watch. I got the 4 TVs now, and I've been watching more baseball. But historically, I've watched a lot more basketball, football, and all these other sports. How much baseball do you actually watch, and do you think there's a lot of value in it?
I mean, not as much now that I have kids, but I actually used to. One of the older hobbies of mine, actually, when I was a lot younger. Every time I was able to watch the Cardinals, I actually used to keep a scorebook, and they always say, such and such, if you're scoring at home, this, that, and the other thing, and nobody thinks that anybody actually does that, but I actually did that for probably a good 3 or 4 years. I love doing it. I just don't have the time anymore, but you learn a lot, and you can go back and look at games against specific teams and pitchers, and kind of recall stuff, but I don't think it's vitally important, but it does help you get kind of a different way to approach different, rather than just looking at stats, whether somebody passes the eye test or not. I think it can be a little bit of a benefit, but, I'll watch a couple hours a day. It'll be on in the background, so I don't get to watch it horribly close, but it's enough to get a feel for what's going on. I've got the MLB TV, so I can flip to games at important points and whatnot. And I think it's a factor, but it's not going to kill you if you don't.
Yeah, I think it's one of the only sports that it doesn't absolutely matter. I think basketball, it's critical to watch a bunch. I think football, you gain so much. We'll get into that down the road, but NFL Rewind's a great tool. And baseball is one of those sports I think you can get misled, and I think the stats and the numbers are just so critical that it's not as imperative to watch. And certainly, baseball is a little bit drier of a sport to watch in general, especially when you're sweating it. I mean, I don't know if there's a sport that's just more brutal to sweat out. I mean, long foul balls, instant replay, guys getting a bat for 8 pitches, whatever, like rooting for certain guys to get up. I mean, it can be brutal and it takes a long time. So it's certainly interesting. Definitely want to talk about that more. St. Louis, thanks so much for coming on. And obviously, we're looking forward to next week and hoping to see more grinders, including hopefully you and I at the top of these leaderboards in May. So any last words?
Good luck tonight, everybody, and have a good one.
All right, guys. Good luck, and we'll see you guys soon.